50, mate.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast that follows our journey of investing. Whether you're an absolute beginner or approaching Warren Buffett status, our aim is to help break down your barriers from beginning to dividend. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Good to be in the new studio and good to have our first company leader joining us in the studio.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had company execs join us. Very excited for this one, and it is all part of the ASX CEO Connect Series that we've been doing with them over the last 6 months or so. It is our absolute pleasure to welcome to the studio Theresa Mlikota. Theresa, welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
So firstly, just a reminder before we start, we're not experts, we're not financial professionals, we are not licensed, we're here just learning like you, and nothing on this podcast should be taken as advice. Do not take financial advice from a podcast. And a reminder, as I said, this is part of the ASX CEO Connect Series that brings together listed companies and investors throughout the year, and we are bringing you 6 interviews in 2022 to hear directly from some of these executives, and you can find more on their website. But if you haven't come across Theresa before, she's the Chief Financial Officer at Adbri, formerly Adelaide Brighton Cement, one of Ren's favourite companies, and I'm sure we'll find out why soon, that they've been making cement and construction materials in Australia since 1882. Prior to Adbri, Theresa has been the CFO at a number of companies, including Parenti Limited, Fulton Hogan, Thies? McMahon Holdings and Barminco. A lot of tongue twisters in there, Theresa.
No, all great companies.
Nice.
Well, Theresa, we always like to start these interviews by having the company leader describe their company in their own words. So to kick us off today, what is Adbri?
So Adbri is, I'll describe it as a bulk materials and logistics company. What do we make and what do we distribute? We distribute cement, concrete, lime, aggregates and masonry products. They're our primary products. We've been around for a long, long time, 140 years, across a range of different names and brands. We work under what we describe as a house of brands. So a lot of people don't necessarily know Adbri as such. They will know brands like Coburn Cement in Western Australia, High-Tech across the Eastern Seaboard. We also operate a large part of our business through joint venture relationships with other competitors. So we run a business in Queensland called State, and we do that in joint venture with Boral. Boral's probably a name that more of your listeners might know. And we also have other joint ventures with our major shareholder. We own Independent Cement in Melbourne and New South Wales. With our major shareholder. So we come, we don't mind how we operate, whether it's through joint venture or directly ourselves. The joint venture model for us has worked really, really well, and it's enabled us to tap regions we would not necessarily be strong in. So we have a Mawson's joint venture that is in regional New South Wales and Victoria as well. Our footprint is right across Australia, so we have operations in pretty much every state and territory of Australia. We are the largest supplier of lime in Australia. Our main customers there, and in fact our entire customer base, is the mining community, mainly out of WA. We're the second largest, what we call cementitious product manufacturer and importer. So we supply a reasonable quantity of cementitious materials, second only to Cement Australia, who are our competitor. So a fairly big footprint across Australia. We have over 200 locations, and we operate with about 1,500 people.
Wow.
Massive.
So big business. Now, you mentioned Boral there. I will get a plug in. We did speak to the CEO, Zlatko.
Yes.
So if you're listening and want to check out that interview, we'll put a link in the show notes. Very interesting. So, Theresa, many of us are very familiar with cement, but not so much the industry. So can you tell us, sort of talk us through the industry as an investor, how we should be thinking about it? What are some of the dynamics at play? Who are the main players in the industry? Yeah, if you could just walk us through it.
Bit of concrete and cement 101.
Yes,
a lot of people think that concrete and cement are the same thing. And just to sort of clarify that cement is an input into concrete. So when you see a concrete mixer, as you all would have seen on the road, the products that go into making concrete include cement, aggregates, sand and water. So cement is essentially, I'll call it the egg in the cake mix. So it binds the other ingredients together. So just to clarify that for people to understand.
Good to know.
Nice.
So I think just in terms of further understanding and a bit of an education, cement is a high-value product. Concrete tends to be a very low-margin product, but it is the retail outlet through which we pull through the high-value products. So the high-value products are aggregates. So if you've got lots of quarries tend to be high-margin operations. So you're using your retail outlets, which is the concrete plants, to pull through the more valuable items, which are cement and aggregates. So that's a little bit of an education
there you go.
on the difference. When we talk about cement, it's not just Portland cement, as we would all probably know. If anyone's ever sort of gone to Bunnings, you'll see big bags of sort of 25 and up to 40 kilograms bags of cement. It's also cementitious materials that we can put in to supplement traditional cement. Cheaper, more environmentally friendly. They also form part of the pool of cementitious materials, and they include slag and fly ash. So we're using renewable products or recycling products to help, build out the volumes that we need.
Yeah, right.
So who are the players? So the players in our sector, in the cement space. So cement requires fairly substantial infrastructure. You need big silos, big terminals, portside positions, and Adbri has a really good footprint in that regard. We've essentially got a portside position or a cement terminal position in every major port in Australia, with the exception of Sydney, because there isn't one in Sydney. It's in Port Kembla for most of the players, is where they have their port terminals for cement. The competitors in that space are Cement Australia, who are 50-50 owned by Hanson and Holcim, which are names your listeners will know better, rather than Cement Australia. The other major competitor is Boral in the cement space.
Yeah.
That's part of our business. The other part of our business is concrete. So these are, when you see the agitator trucks, the concrete trucks as opposed to the cement trucks, the concrete trucks out there, we're about number 4 in concrete, and that's behind Boral, Hanson and Holcim. Behind us, it is a highly fragmented business, especially in markets like Victoria. You'll have a large quantity of very small players in that space. Our major shareholder is a fairly significant player in that space. So they own the Pronto concrete brand in Victoria, and they're pretty big in Victoria, but quite fragmented after that.
Yeah, right.
So in such a fragmented industry, how do you think about Adbri's competitive advantage?
The cement space is not fragmented. The concrete space is the fragmented part of our business. So in the cement space, our competitive advantage is that portside position. So having access to the logistics that enable you to move bulk materials around efficiently, cost efficiently, and in a timely and reliable manner, really critical, especially given what we're going through at the moment, what Australia's going through from a logistics and supply chain point of view. Australia requires about 12 to 13 million tonnes of cement to meet its domestic requirements. About half of that, or maybe 60% of that, is manufactured inside of Australia today. The rest of it is imported.
Wow.
So, a lot of people don't realise that we're not in a self-supply situation within Australia. So having portside positions is critical to receiving imported materials and being able to manage the quantities in constrained silos. It's not fragmented at the cement line. Much more fragmented at the concrete level. In terms of what your competitive advantage is at that concrete and quarry level, it's really about making sure that your locations are you want your locations close to typically your fuel source, your customer and your raw material. So if you've got a concrete plant, you want the quarry pretty close, you want your customer base pretty close. That's why you have to build out a network. You don't want to be too far away from your customer because a fairly substantial part of your cost base is freight. So every time you want to make a delivery, you don't want to be travelling long distances. That there's a fairly substantial cost in that. From a lime point of view, our competitive advantage in WA, which is where we make most of our lime, is the fact that our raw material comes from shell sands. So we essentially vacuum that up off the seafloor, so it's a very low-cost operation. It's a fairly simple processing process. We have a fairly inexpensive gas source because we have a domestic reservation in WA, so that gives us a competitive advantage compared to, say, offshore manufacturers of lime. What our biggest strategic advantage is in Western Australia is our network of road, rail transport and depot network that allows us to feed the mining sector. So we're putting about now about 900,000 tonnes of lime into the mining sector, and between WA, SA and the NT, about 600,000 or 700,000 tonnes of cement into the mining sector.
Wow.
This makes us very different to our competitors. So our competitors tend to be very East Coast based. Their main exposure is to residential and infrastructure. We have that exposure, but we have a counter-cyclical exposure on the West Coast and through the middle of Australia with that mining position. So when rains are affecting the East Coast, they're not necessarily affecting our feed. We've got 24/7 feed into the mining sector. So we've got that counter-cyclical balance, geographical diverse balance as well.
Yeah, right. So, Theresa, it's near impossible to open newspapers at the moment and not see commentary around inflation. So how have you guys been managing this inflationary period? Has it affected the business? Higher limestone prices, coal prices. Can you shed some light on inflation?
And I think that's one of the advantages of being a domestic manufacturer. You do have the advantage of being able to at least control the things you can control. We, like everybody else, we're a substantial logistics company, so we rely on road transport, rail transport that ultimately is linked to fuel cost. And we're all feeling that pain at the petrol pump. We are no different in that regard. So, we've got an enormous number of trucks on the road. We've got materials going on rail. We've got ships at sea that rely on bunker fuel. So they're all linked essentially to oil and fuel prices. So we do have that exposure just like everybody else. We don't have our coal exposure, just to sidetrack a little bit away from the cost element. We are the only company in Australia that manufactures cement not using coal. We use gas and RDF, or refuse-derived fuel. So that's using construction waste to fuel our kiln in Adelaide. Another competitive advantage on your earlier question.
We will pick up on that.
Yeah. So we are less exposed to coal. A number of our competitors manufacture their cementitious materials fired with coal, so we're not exposed to that. That does not mean we aren't indirectly exposed to that, because we do import clinker from offshore, as do others, and they are coal-fired, so we are exposed through that channel.
Yeah, right.
So how are we dealing with that? To answer that question, we are price is the main lever, because these are costs. It's not about tweaking your operation in this regard. These are costs largely out of our control, except to the extent that we've got fixed price contracts, and I can talk a little bit about that. But for us, the cost of diesel is sort of a direct exposure to our bottom line, and the only lever we can really pull there is price. What I'll say about price through this most recent period is that we operate in a competitive space, and it's very difficult to just dial up the price lever or turn on the price lever. And our sector has probably lagged other, I'll say, construction materials sector. So you've seen the price of steel go up. The price of concrete is one of the smallest price increases in the last 6 months, despite the fact that a lot of concrete producers have experienced that exposure to not only coal, not us, but others, and to diesel. So the good news is that the sector has responded, and everybody is now lifting their concrete and cement prices. So the sector has been on a lag. So there's been a lag. They've been wearing that cost for, I'll say, a few months into the start of this year. But what we've seen is most players, whether they're cement or concrete players, lift their prices. So everybody's lifted their prices to counter those costs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We do, on a more positive side, we do have a cost out program that we run year round. We have made some cost savings out of that, and because we're still in a blackout period, I won't talk about that in specific numbers, but that is very focused on our Adelaide facility. We will get the benefits of a locked-in gas contract, so that's delivered some good savings for us, and higher usage of RDF, which is a lower cost fuel than either coal or gas. So a really good alternative to temper that cost.
Yeah, right.
But there's definitely been a lag on, I'll say the sector has been very reluctant historically to raise prices because it has been competitive, but reality has bitten.
Yeah. We will put a pin in that RDF conversation because that's how I've had some exposure to Adbri, and we are interested to talk about that. But Theresa, before we get there, Bryce and I are fascinated by this idea of what matters and what doesn't. We both came from retail backgrounds before doing this podcast, and there are a number of sort of very industry-specific metrics that were really the most important metrics: same-store sales, sales per square foot in the retail space. So when we have a company leader in here, we love to ask what matters and what doesn't in your industry. So what are some of the metrics that really matter?
The most important thing from our perspective is safety. So we measure that in a range of different ways, but having a safe operation is critical to keeping our people wanting to work with us. So retaining people is a critical element, and keeping them safe is part of our core value. So that's number one for us on anything we do. We will make sure we keep our people safe before we do anything else. If we look at what's critical to the longevity of this business, it is essentially cost per tonne. So making sure that we are the lowest cost producer across our cementitious, whichever way we're producing cement, and then the lowest cost producer of lime. We probably are the lowest cost producer of lime because our raw material source is relatively inexpensive. We don't have to quarry limestone for that, so we get that relatively cheaply compared to others. And probably the last thing for us is carbon intensity. So if you think about the long-term view of this business, reducing the carbon intensity of our business relative to our competitors is going to be critical. So, measuring the carbon output per tonne or per unit or per cubic metre, whichever way you want to look at it. The sector is putting out environmental product disclosures at the moment. It measures how carbon intensive your product is, and that's going to be, I guess, the great leveller and comparator for everybody, and making sure that yours is the lowest number is going to be critical. Our Birkenhead facility currently produces the lowest carbon cement in Australia today because of that RDF and gas usage compared to everybody else still using coal. That's a great thing to have. And then on the other side of the country, our lime facility, it has, compared to the imports and everything else that's manufactured in Australia, I'd be comfortable in saying that we are the lowest carbon footprint on lime as well, because we fire our kiln in WA through a mixture of coal and gas. But it's about 50-50 gas and coal, so that gives us a lower carbon footprint.
Yeah, right.
It's that low cost, and when the borders open up, and the borders have shielded our sector a little bit from pesky importers, but we are importers ourselves, but we operate under long-term contracts. So anyone that's trying to import under short-term contracts would be feeling the full pain of increased shipping costs. We don't feel that. We are feeling it a bit on bunker fuel, but we've got dedicated shipping under long-term arrangements. Making sure that, when those borders reopen, that our products can compete very strongly against and continue to compete, as they always have, against imports, is critical. So our focus is cost per tonne.
Yeah, nice.
So if that's the focus, are there any metrics that you often see discussed in business media that you just think totally useless? Why are they talking about that? Investors, don't worry about it.
No, look, I think media tend to get it pretty right. I think they understand our business. We're not an overly complicated business, to be honest. One thing that I think media or perhaps analysts don't appreciate fully, they see the nature of our assets and that they're major infrastructure assets, big terminals, big kilns, and they think, that's a big fixed cost base. Therefore, we must have really high operational leverage. We actually have a very high variable cost base. when volumes move, it doesn't necessarily translate to, major bottom line movements. It's only sort of at the margins, particularly in the concrete space, because you're buying in all of those ingredients to make a concrete mix. You're exposed to that raw material and hauling, or transportation cost. And also where we don't manufacture our own cement, where we're importing clinker and grinding it, a fairly substantial portion of the cost is the raw material cost and the shipping to get it to Australia. So that's entirely variable. There's not a fixed cost element. So a bit of clarification around that. And probably the other point of clarity is just how large a portion of our cost base is logistics. We are transporting some of our goods up to 3,000 kilometres from source. So when you're feeding the mining community, you've got a lot of road and rail, and we're in the fortunate position of having a depot network that we think cannot be replicated. Again, to that competitive advantage, it means a lot of fuel that's being consumed to get product to customer.
Yeah. All right. Well, Theresa, before we move to the sustainability challenge of cement and concrete, we will take a very quick break to hear from our sponsors and then jump back in.
So, Theresa, before the break, we've mentioned sustainability a few times. And for people listening who aren't familiar with the context, sustainability in the cement industry is critical because it's a big source of emissions. I think globally it's responsible for about 8% of emissions, which is similar to the global car fleet. So a big challenge and I guess a big opportunity for the companies that can solve it. How do you think about sustainability in the industry and sustainability at Adbri?
I think probably firstly, sustainability is more than just climate change. For us, it's really about, it's about people, it's about our communities. So being able to operate in the communities that we work within is critical. So a large element of what we do is keeping, close ties and connections with our community because, we are operating scale industrial facilities. That's a key element of being able to, it's our license to operate in a sense. People, being able to engage our people and keep them and retain them, highly critical in this labour-constrained market. So that's something that we have a very heavy focus on. We are doing some things to, tap new sources of people. We have what we're calling a driver academy to try and attract women concrete truck drivers for ourselves. So we've just gone through a period of recruitment through that space, and there's been an element of success there. We're increasing our source of graduates as well because we have a very loyal and dedicated workforce that are getting probably at the older end of the scale. So attracting young people into, let's say a carbon intensive business has its challenges, let's just say. And clearly the response to climate change is the big sustainability challenge for a business like ours. There's no doubt about it. If you look at the emissions from cement, about 40% of the emissions that we generate are from the fuels we use. 60% of the emissions out of both cement production and lime production are what we call hard to abate or difficult to abate, and they come from the process itself. So you're basically taking, get out your chemistry book, a calcium carbonate and taking the CO2 out of it to make either a lime product or a cementitious material. Far more complicated than that. I'm just an accountant. I'm not trying to pretend to be a chemist. But you're basically, the chemical process to make lime or cement is to extract CO2 from a stone or from a sand. So that's hard to abate. So there's no immediate technical solution for that, and that's what the sector's working on. A lot of the R&D in that space is very focused on how to capture and store it rather than to eliminate it because it is, we can't change the chemistry. What I will say is that the products that we produce are not necessarily immediately interchangeable with others, particularly lime. These are products that we think are necessary to the future growth of Australia and indeed the mining community, mining outputs of Australia. We're doing quite a bit of work with, partnering with other people that have expertise in R&D. We're not at the bleeding edge of the R&D. There are sector participants who are trialling different carbon capture options. And we've partnered up with Calix and we're looking at their technology. Relating to our lime business, some of our competitors in Europe are using Calyx or trialling Calyx in a cement application. So what we hope that they can work that end, we'll work the lime end. And these are trials. So and the technology we're looking at in relation to lime has worked not at scale and with a finer product. So it's about developing that over perhaps the next decade. So we are focused on the 40% that we can look to address more immediately because where there are solutions to that exposure. What I will say is that our carbon reduction journey has been going on for nearly 2 decades. So as I've said, we are the only player in the market not using coal. So we have already transitioned from coal to gas, and from gas we're moving to RDF. And in the West we've gone from gas to a combination of gas and coal. And we've committed to going to zero coal usage in WA by 2024. Oh, wow. So we'll just be gas and RDF for the products that we manufacture. We are still importing products that are using coal as a fuel, measured as a Scope 3 emission. Our focus in the short term is on Scope 1 and 2 and that 40%. Let's
zoom in on RDF a little bit because that's why I was excited to speak to you today, because I have had some very incidental exposure to Adbri when I was working in the sustainability team at Coles, and we were trying to find solutions for hard to recycle waste. This RDF, this resource-derived fuel, is that what it's?
Refuse-derived.
Refuse-derived fuel. For hard to recycle plastics or contaminated plastics and stuff like that, we could send them to Adbri via Resource Co and use them to power your kilns rather than using coal, which was really exciting for us because a lot of the time we didn't have better solutions for this stuff. So at least there was an outlet. Tell us a little bit about that, RDF, the opportunity for the industry more broadly to follow in your footsteps and get coal out of their kilns as well. But yeah, for people that probably aren't familiar with what you're doing, can you share a bit of light?
Okay, so no technical expert on RDF, but again, look, refuse-derived fuels can be many things. So a refuse is any kind of refuse, or waste. In our case, what we're putting into our Birkenhead kiln in Port Adelaide is mainly construction waste. So any materials that come off a site, including plastics, are collected by Resource Co and mulched into what I can only describe as what you would get out of your vacuum cleaner bag. That's how it looks like when it goes, and it actually smells like that when it goes into the kiln. What we're doing there is we're avoiding having that waste go into a waste dump or a tip. We're avoiding landfill being consumed and the emissions or the methane that comes from that over the longer term. Other refuse-derived materials in other cases is just sort of wood chip, and some people use that as their RDF fuel, but it's not that prevalent in Australia, more prevalent in Europe where, carbon taxes apply. So great opportunity for us. It's, as I said before, much cheaper than coal and carbon intensity much, much lower. The fuel that we're using is one type. We are looking at perhaps using something that has more plastics in it, as what we're calling internally as RDF2, is something that we're looking into at the moment. So that would, but you are constrained by where the source of the waste comes from, because that can't move. Moving that across states can be quite expensive, and it sort of defeats the purpose because you're putting trucks on roads to do it. So it's got to be, it's kind of a localised solution, and in the case of Adelaide, it's a great solution for us.
So Theresa, one more question on sustainability. We are obviously seeing carbon pricing conversation come up again in Australia, new government, and it's in line with conversations in certain parts of the world where carbon pricing is on the agenda or already in place, and then there are other parts of the world where carbon pricing is perhaps not so much on the agenda. So as you think about competing in a global market, how do you think about competing with imports that may not be subject to carbon pricing in the future?
Most of the cement manufacturers of Australia are doing a level of importation anyway, and we are the chief importers of the bulk of the materials that come into our market. We would need to be. We are working with government and the agencies that support our sector. Our general view would be that there would need to be a level playing field, not to shield in an inappropriate way our sector, just to put it on a level playing field. We can compete as long as everybody's run by the same rules, and we'd be very comfortable that our low carbon position would put us ahead of those products if a level playing field applied. So that would be our desired state. We'd have to work with. Safeguard mechanisms are the big topic of this week, and we'd be working with government to ensure that we were not being penalised against a competing product coming from offshore.
So, Theresa, we always ask the final 3 questions to all of our executives when they come on. So, to kick it off, what does the next 12 months look like for Adbri? Anything in the pipeline that you can share? And if you can't share it, we'll still like you to share it because it's good content.
So look, we have recently acquired 3 different businesses, some through JV and some directly. And the next 12 months is really about, we've gone through the pain of integration over the last few months. It's really getting them humming and generating good returns for us because we've made some significant investments. And this is about building out our concrete and aggregate network to pull through more of those high value items, cement and aggregates. We bought in JV with our Mawson's counterpart, the Millbrae business. That's in regional New South Wales, really neat little business. We bought a sand quarry in Melbourne in JV with our major shareholder. That's called, it trades under the name of Metro Quarries. And we bought the Zanos business in Queensland, which is, they're all concrete and aggregate businesses. And let's just say that we want them to pump really hard for us over the balance of the year. That's why we've made an investment we want to return. Another big item on our agenda is we've about 25% complete on our Kwinana upgrade project in Western Australia. So we had an old cement facility that's essentially been rebuilt at a portside location in Kwinana. So we've moved it from our Munster position to Kwinana. $200 million investment. So it's a big piece of work, a big project for us, and getting that completed is a big focus. And we're saying it's it'll be commissioned in the middle of next year. So there's a lot of logistics and labour that we're relying on to get us there. So that's another big focus for us. Clearly managing price and cost and getting ahead of that cost inflation is, I'll say a more immediate, everyday management item, and that's really out with our salespeople. That's a big focus for them. Another area for us is we continue to develop our footprint in infrastructure. You can see resi coming off a little bit. We know we see the inflection point for resi being sort of end of 2023, so we think it's going to come off sort of a little bit next year and then pop up again. What we're hoping will fill the gap is infrastructure, because there's a big pipeline of projects that have kind of been in abatement, waiting, because of skills and material shortages. So governments have sort of pulled back on some of those, which is good in a way because we'll get a flatter delivery curve. Yeah. That suits all of us. That suits us. It means what we've seen this year is that because we've seen a lot of wet weather, what tends to happen is, you take an order and then you can't deliver it because it's raining. You can't do a concrete pour when it's raining. And then when it's dry, you're using overtime and hire trucks to get it done. Same would happen in infrastructure. So we expect that to be a long source of volume demand for us over the next sort of 3 or 4 years.
Big La Nina coming this summer again, apparently.
We recognise that. So it's really about making sure that we've got people on hand and trucks on hand for the dry, and that's we've been highly responsive to our customer base, trying to get volumes delivered. So
something I didn't think about.
You can't mention Australian residential property on an investing podcast without asking a follow-up question. You mentioned there you think it'll slow for the next sort of year and a half, and then the inflection point will be the end of 2023?
Well, no, I'm saying it will slow next year. We have got a really full order book out to the end of this calendar year. We think it'll sort of slow a bit next year. And then what we expect will happen is that the doors to migration will start to open up.
Yeah, okay.
We hope.
Yep.
We all need it. that will
be
we'll get a kick. It'll take a bit of time to kick, but we hope that infrastructure will fill the void in the interim.
Yeah.
So we've made some good headway into infrastructure. We've developed our capability because we've built out that concrete, aggregate, and cement network at a more localised level. We're bidding into projects where our facilities are close to the projects. That allows us to bid those projects cost competitively or price competitively, and for us to make a margin because we're delivering it cost competitively. So we've made some, we've had some good traction in the infrastructure sector. So that'll be an ongoing focus for us over the next 6 months.
Yeah, great. Yeah, nice. So we always like to ask company leaders about risks to their business. So when you think about Adbri today, what would be the biggest risk that keeps you up at night?
Remaining cost competitive is something that is a risk we manage every day, and so that we'll just park that one because we've spoken about that one. But really meeting, I guess, the climate change challenges set by society is probably the biggest risk to a sector like ours. So given that we don't have a technology solution for the hard to abate, I didn't really sort of talk about the things that we are doing to address the 40%. We have committed to a 10% reduction in our lime emissions, 20% reduction in our cement emissions, and 100% sort of transfer of electricity usage to renewables by 2030.
Wow.
So there's some of the things. So in that carbon reduction journey, they're in our short-term view. Technology, our focus, on the 60% or the hard to abate is where we're investing our R&D dollars and investing in partnerships with people that have more expertise in it than perhaps we have.
Well, Calix is definitely a company that gets a bit of buzz in the Australian investing community, but sounds like for any budding engineers or entrepreneurs out there, the world's going to need concrete and cement. So there's a big challenge to try and solve.
And lime.
Yeah, and lime. Never forget lime. But Theresa, we want to say a massive thank you for joining us today. The final question we always like to end the interview with, we're long-term investors here at Equity Mates. We like to think long-term. So if you think about Adbri in 10 years from now, what would success look like?
We would be the lowest cost, lowest carbon footprint manufacturer of materials. We'd have a customer base that saw us as the reliable quality producer, critical to their operations. Our operations would be running on entirely renewable fuels. Our workforce would see us as the employer of choice. And our shareholders would be receiving double-digit returns.
The perfect company.
Love that.
Sounds like the perfect
So
company.
you got your work cut out for you then.
Just 10 years. I've got 10 years.
Love that. Well, Theresa, thank you so much for joining us. We always do really appreciate spending time with leaders of listed companies and getting a bit of insight into how the company runs, and it's certainly valuable for our community. So thank you very much. And also thank you to the ASX CEO Connect Series for making it happen. As I said at the top, the series is all about bringing listed companies and investors together, and we've partnered with them throughout 2022. You can hear more of the episodes that we've done with them on our feed, or you can head to the ASX website to find out more. Just search CEO Connect Series. They do have webinars that you can tune into as well. If you don't get a chance, we'll be doing some of the follow-up with some of the CEOs. So thank you very much, Theresa. It was an absolute pleasure. And
likewise.
Good luck over the next 10 years.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Theresa.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Equity Mates. We love hearing from you, so drop us a line at contact@equitymates.com, or even better, go to your podcast player and leave a 5-star review. Also, a reminder that the Equity Mates content train doesn't stop when you've run out of episodes to binge. We've got a brand new website, a Facebook discussion group. We're on Instagram, YouTube, and slowly making our way as an influencer on TikTok. Well, that's Ren. So come and say hello and join the community. We'd love to welcome you. Until next time.
Equity Mates Investing Podcast is a product of Equity Mates Media. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. Equity Mates gives listeners access to information and educational content provided by a range of financial service professionals. It is not intended as a substitute for professional finance, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of Equity Mates Investing podcast are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Equity Mates Media does not operate under an Australian Financial Services licence and relies on the exemption available under the Corporations Act 2001 in respect of any information or advice given. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. Do not take financial advice from a podcast or video. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the Equity Mates website, where you can find ASIC resources and find a registered financial professional near you. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media and the hosts of Equity Mates Investing podcast acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.